All right, we have a special edition of the Walkoff. We're joined by Sports Illustrated's Pat Ragazzo. Pat Ragazzo has been covering the Mets on Sports Illustrated since 2018. He's a friend of the show. We've had him on a few times. I'm joined by Justin and Vincent, who are frequently on the Walkoff. Pat, thanks so much for joining the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Always a pleasure coming on and chop it up with you.
Appreciate it. So I wanted to start out with the most recent news with the Mets, which is Freddie Peralta. You've been all over that reporting. You reported that Peralta is open to an extension with the Mets. Can you tell us
Yep.
the latest, what you've been hearing about the potential extension and where the Mets are at with it?
Well, as Peralta said yesterday over his introductory Zoom with the Mets, he wants to get acclimated first. The Mets want him to get acclimated first. But I've been told that Peralta has told people close to him that he wanted to go to a team where he had the opportunity to sign an extension, and the Mets were one of those teams on his wish list. So I could see it, talks potentially picking up in March, which is when those talks typically happen between the player and the team regarding extensions. But right now, he's just going to needing to get acclimated since the trade just went through last week.
All right, Pat. Vincent, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, and thank you so much for coming on.
Of course.
Uh, was wondering, Freddie Peralta comes into the situation. He looks like he's probably going to be the ace, and McLean is going to sit up there somewhere with him. In all of this, Kodai Senga's been their star pitcher for the last couple of years. Now he's dealing with some injury problems. Where does a healthy Kodai Senga sit in this rotation?
I think a healthy Kodai Senga is probably a 3 or a 4 in the Mets rotation, and they are counting on him to bounce back this year and be healthy and be himself. And David Stearns said that after the new year, Kodai Senga came over stateside and pitched in front of Mets officials, and he looked healthy and he looked good and he looked ready to go. So I think the Mets are excited about what they might get from him if they're able to keep him healthy this year. So yeah, you look at Manaya and you look at Senga as guys needing to bounce back in 2026. And you could pencil either of them in at the number 3 or the number 4, and then you have David Peterson and Clay Holmes, who could be your number 4 or number 5.
Hey Pat, it's a pleasure meeting you. Thank you again for coming on to the show. Just a quick
Thank
question once again about Freddie Peralta. Obviously, he's now the new acquisition for the Mets. Do you see them possibly going out into the market one more time to try to get a starter in case of an injury? Because Vincent alluded to Kodai Senga's injury history. Sean Manaea missed some time last season as well. Is there a chance that they go out into the market and get somebody, or are they relying maybe on Tobias Myers, who was also a part of that deal that could make a spot start in case of an injury?
I think they have solid depth. I think they're pretty much set with what they have. I mean, never say never, especially with Steve Cohen. But I think as far as making major moves, the Mets are done. Maybe they could pull off a trade or a signing to bring in another depth starter, but I'd kind of be surprised because they do have Jonah Tong waiting in the wings. They have Christian Scott coming back from injury, from Tommy John surgery. And they do have Tobias Myers, who's shown flashes as a starter in the past. So I think that the Mets are pretty much set on their pitching. Now, obviously, an injury could happen. We saw it last year where multiple injuries occurred to their starting rotation during spring training, and they really didn't do much to patch things up. They thought that they were okay with their depth, and they didn't go out and get another starter. I think that this year might possibly very much go differently where they probably would make a move if one of their starters went down. But right now, I think they're pretty much set.
Where do you see the first base situation going? Obviously, Polanco's penciled in as a starter right now, but he's never really played first base. Brett Beatty might be an option there. What have you heard about the Mets' dealings with first base?
I think the Mets are confident that Jorge Polanco's athleticism will transfer to the first base position. If that doesn't work, then they have Brett Beatty, who's probably going to get some first base reps. They have Mark Vientos, who's probably going to get some first base reps. But my personal opinion is they're taking a big risk this year at the first base position. I think Bo Bichette will be able to transition to the third base position, but I think at first base they are taking a risk because they don't really have better insurance options at the position as opposed to if Bichette falters at third, they could maybe move him around and they have Beatty, who's a natural third baseman.
And you talked about risks. There's also potential for the risk in the outfield.
Yeah.
Clearly, with the acquisition of Luis Robert, it brings a nice bat to the team. But now having him and Soto in the outfield might be a defensive risk. Is there any potential to make some changes to center field position, or are they just going to run with what they got?
I think they're excited about Luis Robert Jr. and he's no slouch at the center field position. He put up good numbers last year. He had 7 outs above average, which was 12th among center fielders in baseball. Defensively, he brings speed. He stole 33 bases last year, and he's only 3 seasons removed from hitting 38 home runs and posting an 857 OPS with the White Sox. So, I think that they're excited about what Luis Robert might bring to a potential contender and to a better lineup than what he had with the White Sox the last few years. He also dealt with injuries over the last couple of years, and he had a big second half of the season in 2025. So I think the Mets are counting on him to bounce back this year, and I think that there's a good shot that he does. I would look more at the left field position. Yes, of course, Soto is he was ranked dead last in outs above average in right field. He's not very good in the outfield, but he makes up with that with his offense, obviously. But I would look at the left field position where you have top prospect Carson Benj, who's going to be given every opportunity to win the job. But if he's not ready, then they might have to go with Tyrone Taylor, who's a defensive whiz, but he doesn't bring much with the bat. So I think that there is some risk there, and that is why they are looking for a part-time outfielder. But yeah, it seems like they're hoping that Benj will win that job in left field.
Yeah, and on that same topic as well, that actually leads me into my next question in regards to Carson Benj. Obviously, he is a highly rated prospect in all of baseball, number one for the Mets. Going into the season, like, is the plan for them to actually have Benj be the everyday left fielder coming out of spring training, or is there a chance that, as I talked about before, going back into the market, maybe looking for some more outfield depth? I know one of the guys that really came up in free agency that has been talked a lot in reports has been Austin Hayes as a possible backup option out in left field in case it doesn't work out right out of the gates for Carson Benj. So I was wondering if there's any talks on a possible signing of another outfielder in case it doesn't work out right away.
Well, they are monitoring the market for part-time outfielders, and Austin Hayes would be a good insurance option to bring onto the roster. Also, right-handed bat, bring more balance to the lineup, bring more balance to the outfield as well. But yeah, they're monitoring the situation. They're going to be opportunistic, but right now it seems like Carson Benj is going to get a shot to win that job in left field.
In terms of the bullpen, obviously Devin Williams is the closer as of right now, coming off of kind of a rough year with the Yankees, though. Do you think they brought in Luke Weaver as kind of an insurance policy that if Devin Williams doesn't work out, okay, at least we have a guy with the closing experience, or is that sort of just conjecture from the fans?
No, I think that's a good point. I think that if Devin Williams falters, you do have Luke Weaver who has closing experience and he's had success as a closer in the past with the Yankees. And yeah, but Devin Williams is a David Stearns guy. He knew him from Milwaukee, obviously, and he did kind of figure things out with the Yankees down the stretch last season and in the postseason. So I think David Stearns knows what makes this guy tick. And I think that Devin Williams is going to have a probably a bounce back year this year. I know we're saying bounce back a lot. I guess the Mets do have a lot of question marks in that regard. But yeah, it's baseball, and sometimes it can be an up and down game, and especially with relievers and closers, it's definitely very volatile. But Devin Williams has been one of the best closers in baseball for the last couple of years, minus last season. So I think he has a pretty good chance of righting the ship here in his first year with the Mets.
Going along with that, is there any possibility that, if for some reason Williams doesn't work out and if Weaver doesn't work out, is there any possibility of bringing Holmes back in the bullpen to maybe the closing position, or is he solidified as a starter? He doesn't want to move there at all.
Well, that's a good question because the Mets, unless they go with a six-man rotation or trade a starter, they might have to move one of their starters to the bullpen. And Clay Holmes is a guy who has had success as a reliever and a closer in the past. He's been an all-star closer for the Yankees in years past. So I don't think they're banking on moving him to they're hoping that they wouldn't have to move him to the closer role, obviously. But it's an option when you have a guy who has the experience, obviously. So I'd say that's like plan D, E, or F maybe, but it is a possibility considering the experience that he has there.
So I just want to shift the focus to last season actually, because I saw something that came out a couple days ago when Carlos Mendoza joined the John Heyman and Joel Sherman podcast, and he talked about how there really wasn't a lot of communication outside of the baseball field between the players. So I was just kind of wondering if that played like a huge role into the Mets reshaping their lineup for the 2026 season.
I think it did. I think that the Mets recognized that they needed a culture shift, as I reported back in November. And we saw them get rid of Pete Alonso. We saw them get rid of Brandon Nimmo and Edwin Diaz, which they didn't want to get rid of Edwin Diaz, but he left. He didn't want to come back. And they got rid of Jeff McNeil, of course. So I think the major shakeup in the clubhouse and on the roster was them recognizing, putting their hand up that it was time for a culture change, and that's why they broke up the core. So Marcus Simeon has a great reputation as being a great clubhouse guy, bringing guys together on the road for dinners. I believe with the Texas Rangers is what I've heard that Marcus Simeon has a track record of doing. So the hope is that he'll do that, but he'll be able to do that with the Mets and bring the guys closer because we saw in 2024 when Francisco Lindor and Brandon Nimmo did that on the road that it did bring the team closer and it enhanced the chemistry. And I think the Mets are hoping for the same in 2026.
In terms of Steve Cohen, obviously we've seen him be pretty patient thus far as a disappointing season last year, but he's retained Stearns, he's retained Mendoza. Where do you think that patience runs thin? At a certain point, like I say, you have a similar year this year to 2025. Do we see Mendoza get moved? I doubt we see Stearns get moved this soon, but where do you think that patience gets run thin? What has to happen?
I think for the Mets to have a losing season this year or not make the playoffs, I think, yeah, Mendoza's seat is going to be hot if they don't make the playoffs or if they get off to a slow start. Um, and I think his patience ran thin when they missed out on Kyle Tucker. I think we saw it with the moves that the Mets were able to make after that. It's kind of had their whole offseason in 1 week. After missing out on Kyle Tucker, where they made him a very competitive offer, and he just chose to go to the Dodgers, obviously for more money. But the Mets felt like they were cautiously optimistic that they had a decent shot at landing him, and he wound up choosing the Dodgers. So I think we saw Steve Cohen's patience run a little thin there, and then the Mets fire off a bunch of big moves in the coming days after.
Yeah, and in those days coming, that we saw the Bo Bichette move. I'm just wondering, 3 years opt out for the first two, and basically an opt
Yeah.
out for that last one. It I heard that John Heyman asked Bo if there's any possibility if this is just a 1 year contract and he leaves. Has there been any conversations if he is just going to be here for 1 year, or is he set to be a Met for the next 3 years?
When they sign players to short-term contracts and 1 year contracts, they look at it as a 1 year pact or as however many years are on the deal. So since there is an opt-out after the first year, you kind of got to look at it as a 1 year deal. You're hoping that the guy is going to go out there and put up big numbers and put up his career norms with the Mets, maybe even have a career year with the Mets, batting behind Soto, most likely in the lineup. And yeah, you're probably looking at it as a 1 year deal here, and that he might opt out because he's still young. So that is the way to kind of look at it. Considering that there is an opt out after the first year.
And one more for me, going back one more time to Freddie Peralta. Obviously, we talked about it again. It's basically at this point a 1 year rental for a guy that you traded two top five prospects for. I was wondering if the focus on a possible extension kind of plays into the fact that the lockout could be looming after the season if the organizations don't come to a new collective bargaining agreement in time, which in all likelihood it probably won't be. Does that play a factor into Freddie Peralta's decision to try to get a deal done before opening day, or do you really think that he might be going into the season banking on himself and trying to get a fresh new deal coming out of the new CBA?
Well, you can look at it in the sense that they don't know how long this next lockout's going to last. And I was a part of the last one in 2022, which was lasted 100 days, and it felt like a lot longer than that. And this time they're going to be fighting over a salary cap, most likely. The owners want a salary cap, and it's going to probably take longer for this to resolve. And we very well might be missing games in 2027. And for that, I think players would like to be locked up to long-term deals before, going into that lockout, all the uncertainty and the changes that'll be made with the new CBA. So I think that Freddie Peralta specifically, he might be someone who would feel more security if he did have that long-term deal locked up before opening day.
Last one for me as well, Pat, and then Vincent, by all means, if you have anything, feel free. But just big picture for the rest of this offseason, do you think the Mets will be active at all, or will it just be kind of more minor league deals? And if they will be active, where do you think they're going to be set at, or is this kind of the team we're going to be seeing for opening day?
Again, I think the Mets are pretty comfortable with what they have now. I think that they are pretty much set with the roster they have, but what we will see probably some minor league moves still. And the area that they will be adding to will be the pitching staff. Just continue to add pitching depth on minor league deals and yeah, that's you can never have too much pitching. So that's where I see them adding for the remainder of the offseason.
And Pat, I got my last question here, and then we'll let you go. Uh, just wanted to know, and we didn't really talk about this that much, but Jeff McNeil gets traded,
Yeah.
and so does Brandon Nimmo get traded. And a lot of reports were coming out that Nimmo had like political differences in some of the people in the clubhouse, and McNeil had, didn't really like the dynamic between him and Lindor. Is there any truth behind it, or without, saying that anything you can't say, but is there any truth behind it that that's why they traded him, or was it just because they're trying to revitalize and break up the core a little bit?
Yeah, I can't speak to whether there was any truth behind the politics thing or obviously the relationship between Francisco Lindor and Jeff McNeil wasn't chummy, and that's been well documented over the years since Lindor got to the Mets in 2021 with the rat and raccoon incident where he choked out McNeil up against the clubhouse wall. Everyone knows about that, obviously, but I think the Mets just decided that the core hadn't won anything, and it was time to move on and make changes. And they weren't going to sign Pete Alonso to a long-term deal. They weren't willing to go more than 3 or 4 years with him. And Jeff McNeil was a guy who they had been around in that core since 2019, 2018, 2019, and Nimmo had been around obviously the longest tenured Met. So I think they just decided it was time for a change, and by change, then by the way of change, they were going to have to break up the core in order to have a new look roster.
Thanks again for your time, Pat. I know it's been a crazy offseason. We appreciate you always taking some time to talk to us.
Yeah, of course, guys. Thanks for having me.